And so we open another link in our seemingly endless chain. A fever and a flea met at a crossroads and got into a heated argument about who had the better life. They shared anecdotes about their lives and what they had done, until finally the flea said to the fever, "Why, you're so insignificant, you're invisible." And the fever said, "Well, what makes you think because you can hop around that you've got some credibility?" And so they decided that the best thing to do to settle the argument was that they would separate for 3 days and come back to share whatever adventure they had had. So after 3 days, they met at the crossroads again, and the fever looked at the flea and saw that there were bags under his eyes, and he was looking certainly the worse for wear. And the fever said to the flea, "Well, what happened to you?" And the flea said, "Oh, well, I went down the road and I came to this amazing palace. It really was palatial. So I went in and I found myself a very comfortable bed with satin sheets, and I was just making myself settle down for a good night's sleep when a great lumbering body came in and got into the bed smelling of brandy and started to toss and turn and toss and turn. So I decided to give him my best. So I ranged all over him and made him toss and turn some more, toss and turn, until finally he screamed out, 'Flee!' And people came running from everywhere, and did they hound me? They had fly swats and they had everything. I had to fight for my life. I barely got out of there alive." "Oh," said the fever, "I am sorry to hear about that." And the flea said, "Well, what about you?" And the fever said, "Well, I walked down the road and I encountered a peasant, obviously a poor man. So I decided to enter into him. And he hurried home and he said to his wife, 'Wife, I've got a fever. Quickly, get my bed ready.' So my wife came along and lay me down in the bed and brought me some hot soup and cared for me, put a cloth on me. I really enjoyed, she bought all kinds of sweetmeats and all kinds of good things. And every time I started to range around him, even though there were poor people, she would come running with more goodies to feed us. I was going to stay there for a while, but I, of course, had promised that I'd come and meet you at the crossroads, so here I am." So, of course, the flea had to concede that the fever had the better life, and he went off skulking down the road. And then there was a very poor man. He had no means of making even a subsistence living for his wife and his children. So he decided that he would have to leave home and go and seek the fortune elsewhere. He left his wife behind to become a daily maid to put food on the table for their children, and he went off and he learned many skills. And each time he made a few coins, he converted the coins into paper money, which he decided to keep it safe. He would place under patches on his coat. So each time he made money and he converted it into paper money, he would put a patch on his coat. And he made quite a lot over the years in his wandering, so that his coat became totally covered in patches. But when even the lapels and the collar was completely covered in patches, he decided it was time for him to go home to his wife and family. Now the years had passed, and they had thought that he'd got lost and maybe died somewhere, been killed by robbers on the road or some such thing. But before he went back to his hometown, he bought himself a very luxurious coat with a fur collar, and he bundled up his patchwork coat to carry along with him. So when he got to his house and he knocked on the door, his wife was out working, so it was his children who answered the door, and they did not recognize him, certainly not a man in his finery. Their father was a poor man. But he convinced them that he was indeed their father, so they allowed him in. And of course they ran off to tell their mother. Now the man tossed his bundle with his patchwork coat in the corner and decided to go to the temple to pray. In the meantime, his wife arrived home, great excitement, the children saying how happy they were to see their father, and that they were now rich because he'd told them so. But while the man was out at the temple, a knock came on the door, and when the wife opened it, it was a beggar. Now, her husband had just come home. There was nothing in the house that she could give this beggar. And then she noticed the patchwork bundle in the corner and thought, well, at least I can give him this ragged, patched coat. And so she did. When the husband came home, and he explained to his wife that they were now rich people, and he got out a knife to sharpen it. And the wife and the children were quite afraid. They thought that he'd gone mad in the meantime. But then he turned around, and the bundle with his cloak was missing. He asked his wife, "Where is the bundle that was in the corner?" And she explained to him that a beggar had come around and all that she had to give was this coat. He said that coat contained all of our treasure. Everything that I have earned over these years was contained in that coat. His wife swooned on the floor in a faint. But the man donned his coat with his fur collar, and he went out into the town. And as he was walking down the streets of the town, he began to shout, "I am a fool! I am a fool!" beating his chest, "I am a fool! I am a fool!" And people started to gather around. Some recognized him and thought that he'd gone mad. And soon a great crowd had gathered, including the beggar who was wearing his patchwork coat. So the man, of course, seeing the beggar and continuing to beat his chest and say, "I am a fool, I am a fool," went over to the beggar and said, "Let's exchange coats." Well, of course, all the townspeople were quite horrified. They thought, well, he really is mad. Fancy giving a beggar this beautiful ermine coat with a fur collar and taking a patchwork. But the beggar, of course, was very happy to do so. So he took his ermine coat with his fur collar and exchanged it for the patchwork garment. The man donned his patchwork garment and, still shouting, "I am a fool, I am a fool," he returned to his home, took his knife and opened up the treasures that he'd accumulated. The family, of course, lived in riches for the rest of their days. What do the flea and the fever represent for us? What is the deep meaning of the story of the man and his coat? Perhaps in the coming days, when we explore this new link, awareness will arise. But right now, does anything come up for us? What do the flea and the fever represent for us in our experience?
Well, it's easy to undervalue the things that are invisible, like the spirit.
Yes.
And overvalue material things that are very obvious.
Yes. Yes.
For me, the flea was taking by force and the fever was receiving by compassion.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And the coat.
Why was the man more deserving of the treasures in the coat than the beggar?
If this is the question that arises for you, then this is what needs an answer. Why?
Well, just like, oh well, okay, hard work and putting forward to accumulate whatever it is. So he has a right to it.
So the link's already open for you, isn't it?